So we're here at the 8th Annual Financial Services Conference in Brussels, and I'm talking to Eddy Wymeersch, who's the chair of CESR. Now, we've been hearing some interesting things today relating to funding, to financial infrastructure. So what are your thoughts, and what are you going to be telling the conference later?
I am essentially going to tell that the conference that a lot of work is going on, a lot of good work is going on. The question is, will that be sufficient? I have doubts. It is, of course, necessary that we do this work, and that the lacuna, that the repairs in the system are covered. For instance, that we do not have a large part of the system which is out of the view of the supervisors. That cannot be the case. And that's why the reason why we are dealing with derivatives, with credit rating agencies and other stuff, and hedge funds firms. But in addition to that, is that enough? Would that solve the problem? Would that prevent the same developments taking place again? And I wouldn't like to see the same developments taking place because the social damage has been terrible. So I think we have to plead for having more responsibility from the banks, that the way they behave is responsible, taking into account their fundamental role of taking deposits on the one hand and giving credits on the other. That's in fact the fundamental issue. And not starting too much to play their own games, which is of course very much driven by profits. And profits are shareholders, so we have to also talk to the shareholders, engage the shareholders, convince them that they influence the bank to make sure that they don't engage into this high risky business. That being said, how to do that is another question, and I think one of the best techniques I would see is to beef up our rules of corporate governance. And of course, I know in the UK a lot of work is being done, in other places too. We have to look very closely. The Commission is coming forward, by the way, to look at the corporate governance rules. The remuneration question is one of them, but that's the negative question. It is how to avoid risk. But we should make it positively, how to take risk in a responsible way. And of course, these are things that we have to work on.
Okay. Now, about a month ago, your organisation released a paper relating to the rules on short selling and disclosures. Now, at the time, I think a lot of people looked at these rules, and because short selling isn't something that everybody does and everybody understands, it seemed a little complex. Would you explain a little more for us?
The rules themselves, as we have published them, are not so very complex. They are merely disclosure rules that you have to disclose short positions if you reach a certain threshold, which is 0.2% and 0.5% disclosure to the supervisor or disclosure to the public. But that's not the point. The point, I think, which you are underlining rightly is short selling detrimental? And the answer is we don't know very well. There have been cases like in October 2008 when there was a lot of panic in the markets, where there were good reasons for stopping short selling. And we did that, we tried to do that, it was not very successful. But as a normal going concern business, you should not stop short selling, because if you stop short selling, why don't you stop long selling, so you have the other position? The point I think which we are pleading for the moment would be, on the one hand, to have disclosure, to have a good view on what's going on. If we have to step in the markets, then we have at least the information on the one hand. And on the other hand, if a panic develops again, and you never know, that we have the necessary instruments to step in. And there we may have systems like circuit breakers, you may have systems like forbidding naked short selling. That means requiring that there is securities for delivery for every short transactions. It doesn't prevent short selling, but it prevents at least long-term short selling and things like that. So it's not impossible.
Okay, now leading on from that, I presume what you're trying to say is it's the really destructive short selling you're trying to stop, where the hedge funds have leaped into the market, sold 10% of a company and forced them down. That's the kind of thing you're working towards?
Yes, that would be the case which we would like to look at. I don't accuse anybody of doing that, because the evidence that we have is that it was not the shorters that drove down the securities of the banks, but it was those effectively selling securities. And of course that we cannot intervene in that business. That's quite normal, that if there is a lot of loss of confidence in the banks, that the shareholders sell their shares. That's quite normal. So don't confuse the two. Selling and short selling are different things.
Sure. Do you think it's likely that these rules will be taken up? And if so, when do you think that might happen?
Well, they are these rules, like all of the rules that are formulated by CESR, are voluntary rules. They are self-regulatory rules. We expect from the members of CESR, the 27 national supervisors, that they implement these rules in the national legal system and that we have at least more coordination and more harmonization. But we have no legal powers to do that. I expect the European Commission, in the framework of the review of the MiFID directive, to take on at least some rules on short selling and probably giving to the future ESMA, the future authority, the right to impose a short selling ban. And before we get there, I think that the framework for short selling, the detailed rules have to be agreed between the 27 supervisors and adopted then in the new framework as a binding system, a binding technical standard.
I see. So one last question then. One of the speakers we heard earlier on, he was mentioning that that the large banks, the large financial companies need to be looking towards self-restraint. I'm quoting now, obviously, moderating excesses and doing the right thing. I think all of us know deep down that the investment banking community isn't renowned for doing that. What steps is it going to take to make this kind of change in attitude real?
Well, that's what I just said before. They should behave responsibly. And that's what I understand by responsibly is indeed these objectives that you have just mentioned. And there is a lot of things that can be done. Number one, stronger risk management. Organization and the governance, that you have a direct access from the risk management to the risk committee at the highest level of the board, that you have sufficient expertise on the board, that you have people who are not only independent, which we have today, but also knowledgeable. And then also question of appointment of the members of the board. This appointment should be taken place outside the intervention of the CEO, because otherwise he will appoint his friends. So you have this. In addition, investor protection. There is, at the most boards, there is no real awareness about issues of investor protection. Now, I'm not an investor protection specialist, but I can tell you, if you sell to the public products that are detrimental to investors, because you get a good fee from these products, you cheat with your investors. It's almost fraudulent in certain cases. And to just mention a very famous investment bank, our investors should always, our clients should always come first.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time.